Welcome everyone. Hello. So you know what? Splend is run off to London. So I know, poor Splend. Anyway, welcome everyone today. I'm very excited to be here, and I figured I'd bring a little something from my neck of the woods to ring in our meeting today. So if I could please ask, let's see here. Steve, would you lead us in the pledge? Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Steve. All righty, and we have our music makers. Come on up here, gentlemen.
I have to say one thing real quick. I called my lawyer's office today and she's out on vacation because it's her birthday. So happy birthday to Jennifer. Where is she? Yay! Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Jennifer. Happy birthday to you. Yay! Okay, what are we gonna do?
We have a talk today with Alan about the railroad, so we know just which song to do. I'm yelling, baby.
Yeah. Here we go.
Oh, I've been working on the railroad all the livelong day. I've been working on the railroad just to pass the time away. Can't you hear the whistle blowing? Bright and early in the morning. Can't you hear the captain shouting? Dinah, blow your horn. Dinah, won't you blow? Dinah, won't you blow? Dinah, won't you blow your horn? Dinah, won't you blow? Dinah, won't you blow? Dinah, won't you blow your horn? Someone's in the kitchen with Dinah. Someone's in the kitchen, I know. Someone's in the kitchen with Dinah. From the old man Joe, we go fee-fi, fee-I-O, fee-fi, fee-I-O, fee-fi,
Very well done. Thank you. Oh. Oh my goodness. Here you go, gentlemen. I'll save this right here. Okay, and today we have our own wonderful Mike Thompson with a thought for the day.
A thought. The three hardest things that most people have to say. I was wrong. I need help. Worcestershire sauce.
Mike, thank you for that insightful and honest comment. Thank you very much. Wonderful thought. Okay. I'm following the slides. All right. Without our illustrious front line, we could not have this meeting. So I am very proud to introduce all of our helpers today. We have Susan Scoop Mayhall out in Zoom land, and she's going to be our Spur reporter today. Our Spur publisher, Don Wentz, he'll be out there putting that thing together, making it all ring for us. And then we have photographer Mark Snapper Roberts. He's out there taking them pictures. And then the audio visual guru team, there is quite a few of them, but today Magic Paul McCannis is making things happen down there. You go, Paul. And then our Zoom monitor, Jeff Tracker Youngsma, he's out there keeping track of all of us and all of the Zoomers, right, Jeff? And then last but not least, our amazing greeter, the gatekeeper of smiles and handshakes, Debbie Peck. One quick thing I wanted to mention real quick, a little thank you out to Ronnie Forbes. He has so graciously brought in snacks for us and I thoroughly enjoyed them. So a little thank you to you for thinking all of us. Okay, so with that said, let's start introductions. Visiting Rotarians. Do we have any out here in the audience? Okay, Jeff, how about out in Zoom land?
I did not see any, but if you are out there and I did not recognize you, now is your time to speak up or forever hold your peace.
Okay, all right, visiting Rotarians, and we have Magic Mike Dennis O'Brien out there with the microphone. Thank you, Magic. Okay, let's introduce visiting Rotarians and guests. Sorry, I didn't mean to say visiting Rotarians. I meant to just say guests. Sorry.
Visitor. Yes. Same thing.
Sorry,
I'm
my bad.
confused. Okay. I'm very pleased to introduce Walt Finn. And he's actually a member, but hasn't been inducted. So this is the last time we're going to call him that way. So call him a visiting member. And
All right, welcome. Thank you for coming, Tim. Looking forward to having you inducted and part of the team. Our next guest. Oh, we're. Oh.
Robert Freeman, he will be the brief speaker today. So we'll tell more about him then, but he's from Livermore.
Welcome, Robert. Okay.
And next we have Connie Naylor with Ravenswood Historical Site. I call her Auntie Connie.
Welcome, Connie. Thank you for joining us today. We're very excited to have you here.
And I'm very pleased to introduce my wife, Mary, of 59 years. Hey, and tell you, I'm pleased to tell you that just like Johnny Garoppolo, I've been given a 1-year option.
Welcome, Mary. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Okay. All right. So announcements. If you notice on your table, there is a sample of the mini grant. We kind of got the schools covered. So if you know of a nonprofit, a little organization out there that could really use our help, these mini grants need to be submitted back to us by September 7th for consideration. You can go on the website. There is a PDF that you can fill out right on the website and send it in, or you can also, in some cases, people don't have that ability, print them out and get those sent to us by September 7th. Okay, thank you. All right, next, I'm following your slides. Okay, so we're going to have a brief little presentation here, and Goud is going to introduce our presenter. Okay, perfect. Mr. Mike.
Okay, so very briefly, Robert Freeman is the founder and executive director of the organization, nonprofit organization, the Global Uplift Project, and he is from Livermore, and he's going to tell us various projects that is implemented throughout the world. So here's Robert.
Thank you, Goud. Thank you. I'm not only from Livermore, I live about a quarter mile over that way. I swim 3 miles a week at the pool that's 50 yards over that way. Thank you very much for having me. So again, my name is, I promised Sheila, that I was going to hit this thing in 10 minutes. And so give me just a second. I'm going to turn on my stopwatch here. So I've got it. Okay, here we go. So back one more, Paul. There we go. The title of the presentation is, and it sounds like a big thing. It says a model for effective international development. Small scale, high impact infrastructure projects. And the setup is this. 15 years ago, I was a high school teacher, and some of my kids were complaining about how bad the world was. And I said to them, well, what are you guys going to do about it? And they very rightly said, well, Mr. Freeman, we're teenagers. What can we do? And without thinking about it, I said, you know, I bet if each of you did just a little bit, I bet it would rock the world. It's an easy, cheesy thing to say, isn't it? It's kind of like the thing you could put on a bumper sticker and has about as much depth. But we were actually intrigued. I wonder if that's true. I wonder if that's true. If everybody did just a little bit, if we could do anything big with it. So in the spring of 2007, I challenged every kid in my school. I said, in a big assembly in the big gym, I said, if you guys will all put in $1, I will get a classroom built for you in Africa. You never heard 1,770 teenagers be so quiet. Anyway, we went ahead and we did it. We had 1,770 kids. They put in $1,851. And I was like, OMG, now I got to get a classroom built in Africa. What am I going to do? Well, 1851 wasn't enough. So I hustled around to 4 other schools nearby. Same story. Hey, let's do something big for the world, kids. It's $1. What do you say? We raised $9,000 first slide. And in the summer of 2007, we built this classroom in Africa. It's the one on the right, by the way. It's made. The old one is the one on the left. The one on the right is made out of cut stone. It's on a concrete foundation, sheet metal roof. It'll be there for 100 years. It'll educate thousands of children. And we basically built it for $1. And that was the beginning of the whole thing. Let's keep, next slide, Paul. The basic idea is this. Everybody contributes just a small bit. We call it pocket change. And we use all of that money to help the poorest people in the world help themselves. 2 important parts to that statement. All of that money, and I'm going to show you how we do it, and people help themselves. This is the basic architecture. We got the Western donors on the left. That's us. Partners, we work with a lot of Rotary clubs. We work with that other organizations, clubs too, by the way. And on the right is the developing world villages. And we work through non-governmental organizations. We work through nonprofits on the ground in 22 different countries in the developing world. We've completed 249 projects since we started this thing in 2007. Classrooms, medical clinics, libraries, water wells, latrines, science labs, computer labs, small scale, but high impact infrastructure projects that dramatically improve the life chances for the recipient people. This is what it looks like when the local people are helping themselves. We require the locals to contribute 20% of the cost of any project because it's too easy for us rich Americans to parachute in and say, oh, you need a classroom, let's build you a classroom. We want to see how badly they want it. This is a village in Malawi called Manyesa. That's their classroom right there. They came to us and said, can you help us build a classroom? And I said, well, we can help you, but what are you going to do? And they said, what can we do? And I said, well, we're going to build it out of bricks. We'll buy the mixing equipment, the molds, the raw materials. You guys got to make the bricks. Okay. They said, when do we start? That village handmade 160,000 bricks. That tells me they really want this classroom for their kids. And in fact, we ended up building them 5 classrooms. That's what it looks like. Same, I mean, modern classrooms, you can see on the top right here, there's solar facilities. This one runs the office. This one runs the computer lab we put in right there. The most magnificent school in 50-mile radius. This is what it looks like when people are helping themselves in Nicaragua. See that little 7-year-old kid on the left? There he is, heaving away like a man next to his dad. They're mixing the concrete so that we can build a school. This school was funded by 3 Rotary clubs in Santa Cruz. And there it is. That's the old school on the left. Yes, that's the actual school that they had. And there's the one on the right. And that's the difference between what this was actually funded by, not just the 3 Rotary clubs, but the 3 Interact clubs too. So half of the people put in $1, that was a child, and everybody else put in about $10, but that's the result. Next slide. This is what it looks like when they're helping themselves in Nepal. We're going to put a classroom on top of another building, but we got to get 20,000 bricks up to the second story. How are we going to do that? The women of the village formed a human chain up a ladder, and one by one, it took 2 days, they handed 20,000 bricks up to the second story. That's what 20,000 bricks looks like on the second story when it's forming the walls of a classroom. And this is what the final classroom looks like. Over the life of the classroom, divided by the number of kids that are in there, 70 cents. We're putting children into classrooms for 70 cents per child per year. We've built 65 projects in Kenya. That's called the Kanju School. This was actually done by a group of Kiwanis clubs up around the Sacramento area. 15 clubs in what they call their organization. They call it a division 44. 15 clubs. The classroom costs $14,000. You can do the math pretty easily in your head, less than $1,000 per club. That's the old school on the left. That's the new school on the right. Which one would you rather your kids went to school in? This is a crazy thing. Men, this will be tough for you. When a girl reaches puberty, biology has shown that her body is more fertile if she's always got a new egg in there. And the way it does that is every month it flushes out the old egg. It does that with blood. That's what a girl calls her period. If a girl can't manage her period, she cannot stay in school. UNICEF says there's 20 million or more girls that drop out of school every year because they can't manage their periods. Probably the greatest waste of human potential in the world. We've invented a sanitary kit. You can't see it very well, but this is what it is. You see the little wings here? This is a snap. It fits into the girl's undies and like that. So it holds it. Now see these pockets, top and bottom? We have a reusable, washable pad here. It's made out of flannel. It's pajama fabric. And the girl can put it into that thing there like this and put it into the bottom one. And this thing, it comes with 2 of the chassis and 8 pads. There it is. Once this thing gets saturated, she can take it out and put in another one. Costs $6 to make last 3 years, $2 to keep a girl in school. Probably one of the highest returns on human investment in the world. Next slide, please. We've developed this. Thank you. We've made and distributed more than 40,000 of them. It's just unbelievable to help a girl stay in school. We've developed a science lab in a box. It's not literally a box, it's a metaphor, but it's all the equipment, the tools, the instruments, the supplies needed to be able to do world-class high school science, biology, chemistry, and physics. We've installed them in Nepal and Kenya. We're starting to install them in Indonesia later this year. The slab, it costs $2,500. But if you think about over the life of a school, $2,500, it'll help thousands of kids, less than $1 per kid per year to bring them into the real world, doing real world science. Anyway, all these projects have 5 things in common. This is another one. See the thing on the left there? That's a kitchen. The top left is a kitchen at the Kanju school in Kenya. The bottom left is the new kitchen. Can you tell the difference? Cost about $8,000. It's just like nothing. All these things have 5 characteristics. They're all funded by many, many small donations, sometimes as small as $1. They dramatically improve the capacity of the local people for self-development. They're all built by local non-profit NGOs on the ground. The locals contribute 20%, and every dollar donated goes into the project. Let me take you quickly through. There is a handout on your tables. I don't know if there's one for everybody, but take a look at it. I'm not going to go through these. These are examples of just a few of the projects we've done with other Rotary clubs. This is super important. I told you that every dollar donated goes to the project. I don't know if you can see this, but here's how this is our income statement for 2021. There's the sources, where it comes from. Here's the uses, where it goes to. Our operations last year, that's phones, literature, website, travel, software subscriptions, professional services like CPA. The whole operation costs $50,000 to run. I have gone out to foundations and raised $80,000 with the explicit proviso that they will cover our operating costs, which they do, because $80,000 is bigger than $50,000. That's how we, well, I don't mean to be condescending, I'm not. But that's how we guarantee that every single dollar, actually $1.09, that anybody donates goes into their intended project. Next slide, please. We're currently working on a project, and this is how I came to meet Gowd. We have received funding from Belmont Rotary. They've committed $5,000. Palo Alto Rotary's committed $5,000, and we need another $3,000 to build a sewing center to build the Save a Girl kits in Tanzania. We've actually committed to the project, and I'm out now hustling up the last $3,000. Next slide, please. What's the potential? This is mind-blowing. This is mind-blowing. There's 1.2 million Rotarians in the world. Each of them gave $10. That's $12 million. It costs about $12,000 to build one of these classrooms. If everybody will put in $10, we can build 1,000 classrooms every year in the developing world. This is why I call it a change the world idea that's working. Next slide, please. All right, this is it. We're on the glide path to finishing here. Ladies and gentlemen, it is within our reach. Forget all the words. It is within our reach to change the world. Increase the trajectory of human development by building thousands of these little small scale, low cost, high impact infrastructure projects that are proven and working today. See the ugly guy up there? You know the guy I'm talking about, the guy in the red? That's me before COVID made me grow this. I'm in Kenya. It's 2007. We built the very first school. This guy comes up to me and says, "How did you get this school built?" Just like that. Took me 5 seconds to unscramble my brain because I wasn't expecting that to come out of this guy's mouth. And I finally said, "Well, I just went around and asked a bunch of people for $1." The guy was way smarter than me. He thinks about it for 3 seconds and he says, "Ah, yes, even the greatest waterfall starts with a single drop of water." I was so blown away. I was so blown away because he had epitomized what we just did. And from that moment on, July 8th, 2007, that's been our motto, it's been our vision. Ladies and gentlemen, you are one of these drops, and I invite you to create a tsunami of goodwill that can change the world. I think I made it. Did I make 10 minutes? Oh my goodness. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was amazing and inspirational. Okay, we've got Bob Cowan. Bob, are you going to come up? Or,
Sheila?
the mic.
I'll
Yes,
do it
sir.
from right
Oh,
here.
Sorry.
Oh,
Yes.
Sheila, Henry Shea had a question for the last presenter, if that's possible for him to ask.
Tell Henry to wait.
Henry, can you hang on just one quick second? Bob's just got a very quick announcement.
Okay, so the READY program starts the 12th. I sent out an email to everybody that I thought was interested, and maybe some that aren't that interested. And I did have a presentation material for today. Somehow I got lost in the shuffle, but you have to work at the school for this on this program. You have to be approved by the school. And the email I sent out gives the process for doing that. You use what's the new school district website called Raptor. And there's a link, and I'll have it put in the link put in the spur for this week. I'd like to say it's an easy process. Dennis told me that he had a little less effort getting his clearance at the lab so far than getting the clearance at the school district. But that's kind of a hyperbole, I think. So an overstatement. So all this information will be in the website. I know we're tight for time. We start May 12th. The good news is you can come on May 12th. You can come the following week and probably the week after that as a visitor. I'm sorry. This September, this coming 12th, sorry. So you can come sign in as a visitor. None of us will probably be approved yet. Just if you're not familiar with working in the district, you have to have a TB test. That's for when you get your final approval, and you have to pass an FBI police department background check, which includes fingerprinting, which is, by the way, what you need to do to Rotary to work with kids as well. I'm going to let Kathy talk about that in the future. Kathy RcoL.
Okay. Oh, you keep that, pass that on right there. Thank you, Bob. That is such a worthwhile project, you guys. I hope many of you do reach out to Bob to help with that. Okay. Let's see. I think that's it for my announcements. Oh, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, Hank. Oh, what an amazing
Yes.
idea. Okay, Hank, go ahead. I'm sorry, you had a quick question?
Yeah, it's a question for the earlier speaker. Did they have difficulty finding qualified teachers for all the schools that they were building?
Didn't they already
Well,
have?
that's
the
a great
teachers?
question. Remember the school I showed you in Malawi where they built 160,000 bricks? As part of the negotiation, I said, okay, now where's your teacher? And they said, well, we don't have a teacher. I go, well, did you see what the problem with this is? But we worked with them in the National Ministry of Education. We could send a person to the National Education College for 1 year, cost $600, and they could become a credentialed teacher. My school had 120 teachers at the time. I went around and put the clamp on every single one of them. And I said, you're giving me $5 because I got a classroom in Malawi and we need a teacher. And that's how we got it. And we've now got 12 teachers at that school. But that's part of the due diligence. In Nicaragua, we've built 42. And the Nicaraguan Ministry of Education commits they will give us 2 trained teachers for every classroom we build. They need their people to be educated. And it's easier for them to train teachers than the capital costs of building a classroom. Sir, did I answer your question? Did I?
You must.
Yes, thank you.
Perfect.
You can tell I'm a teacher because I check for understanding.
I love, thank you very much. Yes. Okay, I think they've got an amazing website and maybe we could put that up on our website to see and learn more about it. Is that correct, Goud? Okay, and then someone asked about passing the hat. Steve did. That's a wonderful idea because I think it's an amazing opportunity. So I don't have a hat, but I could let somebody else do that. Perfect. Oh, there you go. Okay, so we actually have 2 minutes. Did we have anything else? I can't believe we have 2 minutes. Let me start out by just mentioning next week, we have an amazing speaker that's going to be talking a little bit about local vines, the economy, and truffles, which that just sounds amazing. Mark Triska, and he'll be our speaker on the 7th. Okay. All right. Well, we have, let's go ahead and let's get started with our speaker. So today we have a dear friend of ours, Alan Frank. He's a retired physician from the Lawrence Livermore Lab. He's a musician and the immediate past president of the Livermore Amador Symphony Guild. He was a curator and historian for the Niles Canyon Railway, managed and moved the restoration of the Sunol Depot. He was responsible for the historical information resulting in this being listed on the National Registry. Subsequently, he was asked by the city of Livermore to be the historic consultant for the move and refurbishing of the Livermore Depot. I also wanted to mention in his speech today, he is also selling a book at the back of the room. And if we run out of them, he will take orders. It's $20 a book and every penny is going to our club. So if you please welcome our dear friend, Alan Frank.
I'd like to start by correcting a mispronunciation. I was a physicist at the lab, not a physician. We have a physician here who was with the lab. Okay, I would appreciate if you hold your questions to the end. There should be some time left over for them. I want to hit just some of the pertinent points because many of you have heard much of this story or know this story, the basic story. But what I'm going to talk about are the things that are really left out of the basic stories. I call the talk Parallel Paths, and that's because the town and the railroad grew up together. The San Francisco and San Jose Railroad, which we know today as Caltrain or the Peninsula Line, was in fact already under construction when the Central Pacific Railroad was simply on paper. They had done nothing other than perhaps find a possible route. The SF and SJ principals were also lobbying Congress at the same time that the CP principals were for a piece of the Pacific Railroad Act. That was the act to build the first transcontinental railroad. Collis Huntington, who was really the prime mover of the Central Pacific Railroad, got together and negotiated an agreement with the SF and SJ principals. And that agreement had a couple of zingers in it. One of them was, yes, they would compromise and talk about sending the railroad to San Francisco, but they changed one of the statements in the proposed bill. The proposed bill initially said they would build east from Sacramento. They changed it to read, build east from Pacific tidal waters. Well, many of you in this room probably know that Pacific tidal waters reach to Sacramento. So that could have meant almost anything. In the end, it wound up being Oakland, not San Francisco. San Jose, which was part of the original agreement, became just a spur line. There was another zinger written into their agreement, and that was that they would form a new railroad called the Western Pacific Railroad, and they had to build 20 miles a year. Sounds easy enough. It wasn't in those days. Okay, here's an excerpt of the original Western Pacific charter map. It shows Livermore's Plains, Livermore's house. It shows the hotel and Livermore's Pass. So it shows exactly where the railroad was going to go through the valley. At the same time this map was published, they started asking local counties to back bonds to help support the building of the railroad. In 1864, there was a serious drought, and the Bernal Ranchero, which includes most of Pleasanton today and a lot more, fell into bankruptcy. The ranchero was broken up into 64 plots, which were put on the market for sale. And William Mendenhall decided to buy one of the plots. It's important to remember the survey dates for these plots, for Mendenhall's plot, etc., because that becomes important later in Charles McLaughlin's ownership claims. Charles McLaughlin was the builder of the San Francisco and San Jose. He was a principal of the Western Pacific Railroad, and he contracted himself basically to be the builder of the Western Pacific Railroad. Only he ran out of money in Niles Canyon. And he did make it to 20 miles from San Jose. They pushed through to do that so they could collect their first bonds. He reneged on his contract, defaulted on his contract to the Western Pacific, which meant the Western Pacific was defaulting on their contract with the Central Pacific. So the senior negotiators, Judge Crocker and SFNSJ's Judge Dame negotiated a settlement. And the settlement was that McLaughlin was gone, except he was given the presumably not so valuable land grants for the Western Pacific Railroad. The reason they were thought less than valuable was because most of them were on Mexican charters, Mexican land grant charters, which had been supposedly preserved by the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Later, after the construction was finished, McLaughlin turned around and claimed that claimed ownership of alternate sections of the land grant properties because the diseños, the Mexican diseños, the charts that were provided for the Mexican land grants were not proper surveys. And so he only allowed properties to be kept by their supposed owners for people who had them formally surveyed before the charter of the Western Pacific Railroad, which was in 1865. The railroad was finished in 1869, and in advance of the railroad, the business of the valley changed dramatically. The ranchers in the valley planted as much grain as they could manage, as they could afford, as they had land for, because they expected their grain to be carried to market by the railroad. Before the coming of the railroad, most of their ranching products were hides and tallow, because those could be loaded into a heavy wagon and dragged over the hills to Stockton or to San Jose or Oakland or something like that. This is a timetable that was issued shortly after the railroad opened. Important to notice the date of the timetable. Here is the Mendenhall's plat for the town of Livermore. You can see across the top the Western Pacific Railroad, just a dotted line going through, right through the plat. However, the station for Livermore was listed before the town existed. I wonder why that was. The reason that was because Mendenhall had committed to give the railroad the property on which to build their station. This was a policy of all of the land grant railroads, was to get the locals to donate properties for the stations. Mendenhall's plat was deeded in November, about a month after that timetable. This quote by Charles Crocker really says a lot. Crocker was the guy who actually headed the construction of the Central Pacific Railroad. And he said, oh, we built the railroad for the profits we could make in the building of it. And when we got done, we didn't know what the devil to do with it. Well, this guy knew what to do with it. John Mitchell worked for the railroad as the first station master for Livermore. He was also a resident of the town. He lived at L Street and 3rd in a house he built. He felt that the business of the town and the business of the railroad were complementary, and they needed to work together. All right. The land grant railroads, initially it was just the Central Pacific and the Union Pacific and the Western Pacific too. All formed subsidiary companies. These companies were formed really so they could stiff their stockholders of the major profits. Congress got wind of this, since these were congressional charters, and they started an investigation. They subpoenaed the books. They got Union Pacific's books, but the telegraph moved faster than the federal marshals. And so in Sacramento, the Central Pacific's books, or I should say the contract and finance company's books, went up in flames. And the company was immediately disbanded and replaced by a new company called the Western Development Company. And they went right on with the illegal practices of the previous company. Something that happened, which we really don't know the details of because it went up in flames, was afterwards, the SF&SJ and an unbuilt charter, unbuilt government charter for a railroad called the Southern Pacific came into the ownership of the associates who owned the Central Pacific. We don't know how this happened. We know it happened in about 1868, but that's all we know about it. When the Southern Pacific was built, there had been a bunch of settlers in the Central Valley who were Civil War veterans. Once the railroad was built, Huntington invoked the Western Pacific land decisions to claim the alternate sections through the Central Valley. And that would have been basically from Sacramento all the way down past Bakersfield. The settlers rose up in arms. When the railroad agents and US Marshals came to claim the railroad's ownership, they were met with gunfire. 8 people died, and it was subsequently called the Muscle Slough tragedy. I contend that the fallout from this one event hurt the railroads and very much helped their demise 100 years later. William Randolph Hearst, right after the Muscle Slough tragedy, published this cartoon, which characterized Huntington as an octopus. He had his hands in everything. He controlled the California government, the California courts. He controlled much of congressional funds coming to California and so much more. His approbation stuck. 20 years later, Frank Norris wrote a novel called The Octopus, which basically he laid out the Southern Pacific's policies and the way they worked, and included the Muscle Slough tragedy in the book. That galvanized public attention and brought very first recognition to Teddy Roosevelt's trustbusters that the Southern Pacific Railroad needed to be brought into control. Now, in the 1880s, the cash value of Livermore's products changed from grains to wine. Wine became the major business of the valley with 121 wineries. That was actually largely demolished during Prohibition, but is beginning to grow back. Okay, railroads were the favorite games of the Gilded Age, Wall Street play toys, and their ruthless and unprincipled moguls. Two of the combatants, Collis Huntington and Jay Gould, were at each other's, very pleasantly at each other's teeth for decades. Jay Gould always wanted his own transcontinental railroad. Huntington, and after Huntington died, even Harriman, who took over the SP, did not want Gould to compete with their railroad into the Bay Area. In the stock crash of 1893, Huntington could not raise the capital needed to pay off the federal construction bonds that were coming due. These were 30-year bonds, and they were coming due and had to be paid off. Instead, he had been stealing the Central Pacific's profits to pay for the construction of the Southern Pacific. They were independent corporations officially, even though they had some of the same principles. But this was illegal. Even at that time, it was illegal. Hearst's reporter, Ambrose Bierce, exposed the misinformation that Huntington had been feeding Congress while seeking a bailout from them for these bonds. The damage was done in the court of public opinion and in Congress and the courts. And SP had to settle by agreeing to pay off the Central Pacific bonds. The way it was arranged, effectively, Southern Pacific leased the Central Pacific for the amount of the bonds. But what it actually did was to bring the Central Pacific directly into the Southern Pacific Railroad. Harriman was a railroad man who took over after Huntington died in 1900. He was president of the Union Pacific Railroad and moved to merge the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific, so it would be one coherent transcontinental railroad. Teddy Roosevelt's antitrust campaign immediately sunk their teeth into that very transaction. Throughout this period, the national enmity of the railroad practices and their growing power grew publicly. Oops. Okay, in 1903, our own John Mitchell retired. New agents came in, but the management had changed completely. This time, the manager was a full-time railroad employee. He had virtually no contact with the town. And this was the beginning of the change of relationship where the formerly parallel paths went their own ways. Okay, both Huntington and Harriman were concerned about parallel lines coming in and taking business from their railroads. There were two lines chartered through Livermore, the California and Nevada, and the Alameda and San Joaquin. Both were eventually incorporated into transcontinental railroads. The California and Nevada was bought out by the Santa Fe, who in 1904 actually became the third transcontinental line into the Bay Area, but did not come through Livermore. They wanted the waterfront rights in Berkeley. The Alameda and San Joaquin was secretly bought by Gould. In fact, Gould's son as well. They had a campaign to buy out all of these little service regional railroads in an effort to knit them all together into their own transcontinental. And in 1910, that became what I call the Western Pacific Railway. And I make a distinction from the original Western Pacific Railroad, which sort of no longer existed, to the new Western Pacific Railway. And the reason they used that name is because it was uncopyrighted and they stole it from the CP. Okay, the Western Pacific Railway came right through Livermore, paralleled the original Western Pacific over the Altamont, and ostensibly was going to create competition for the local markets. Well, that never happened. They had the same freight rates, the same regulations, the same passenger fares, but poorer service. Basically, that railroad was a Gould family vendetta against the Central Pacific, and it was a business failure. It went through bankruptcy 3 times over the next 50 years. The real competition came from new technologies. The automobile really drove the separation between the town and the railroad, largely because the Western Pacific Railway crossed every north town street in the northern edition with an at-grade crossing. And the number of accidents and serious deadly accidents skyrocketed. And the city actually had battles with the Western Pacific Railway to do what was necessary to create a safer situation. Throughout this period, federal support went entirely to the roadways and later to airways, airports, etc. I still call this the octopus factor because this is really the long-term result of the Mussel Slough tragedy. In the 40s, the amount of freight traffic coming out of Livermore diminished. The wine industry was trying to recover from the prohibition. This was the Livermore Barrel Factory. Most of you probably don't know we had a barrel factory here in town. After the 1950s, high tech became predominant and most freight services in and around Livermore were simply non-competitive. John Shirley championed a project called the Railroad Avenue Project, where he wanted to build a bypass through town rather than through the middle of town. At the same time, there was a lot of talk from the city council about getting the railroad out of the middle of town. And that would help clear the streets because Railroad Avenue, much of Railroad Avenue was still owned by the railroad. At the same time, the Southern Pacific Railroad was failing. They had a policy, they were trying to build shopping centers to use what they called unused property or excess property. They had planned a major regional shopping center to go from Livermore Avenue to S Street, all one big shopping center. But they hid that plan until the track relocation plan was in place. Here's John Shirley's photograph of the track relocation plan being constructed. That's on the right. And on the left is actually the first phase of SP's development plan. And you can see there was a bypass track that they put in to give them the space. The original track went right through the middle of Safeway. All right. The Livermore Depot was closed and the railroad very quickly wanted to demolish the depot. In fact, started the demolition. But civic pressure saved the depot. And we have the depot today because of that. That civic pressure also threw a monkey wrench into SP's major development program for two reasons. One, they had to commit to preserve the depot. And they gave long-term leases to a restaurant. And by the time they could have done something about it, they were already going under. That leaves three residual problems today. That one is the station site development. That's the downtown redevelopment issues. There are still two remaining at-grade crossings, which cause a lot of horn blowing and occasional serious accidents. The growing population of Livermore has really outrun the ability of the freeways and of the local transit projects. As Livermore has exploded, it was followed by an exploding population in the Central Valley. And ACE, which has helped a lot for moving people from the Central Valley to Livermore and from Livermore to the Silicon Valley, has maxed out its available trackage rights because they're on the Union Pacific Railroad and their main business is freight. And they won't allow additional trackage rights to interfere with their freight. There's a new proposal on the books called Valley Link, and they plan to use the original Western Pacific, Central Pacific roadbed, which was preserved by the county. I'll finish up by showing this photograph. The train in the foreground was Western Pacific Railway's Zephyr, which was their last attempt to preserve long-distance rail travel. The track on the right is the original Western Pacific track that at the time of the photograph was still in service with the Southern Pacific. And you can see the entrance to what's called the Summit Tunnel, which was directly under Highway 50. That's now one of the roads of 580. And the tunnel is still there. I've in fact walked through it and driven over much of that roadbed with the county. And it's in surprisingly good shape. And it's going to be a very big help for the Valley Connect project. So with that, I'll conclude and ask for questions. Oh, do we have any questions? Yes.
Where would you go? Where do you find that tunnel? Is that walkable to go visit, park and walk?
The answer is sort of yes. There's a place just before you go over the overpass where you can pull off of 580 and you can walk out there and see the entrance to the tunnel. Right. Just before that, the eastbound lane of 580 goes under the railroad. And then there's that pullout where the old track went under old Highway 50 and still goes under, or the right of way still goes under 580.
about in Zoom land?
Anybody in Zoom land?
Max or,
Yeah,
Brian?
Henry Shea, you're up, buddy.
Okay. Let's see, in the latter half of the 1800s, I guess starting 1870, 1880, a lot of Chinese immigrants were used by and large as slaves to put the railroad tracks through the Rockies. Did any of that occur in the Bay Area?
Yes, it occurred actually long before the time you were talking about. The very first railroads in California were built by Chinese labor. The Central Pacific was basically built by Chinese labor. The Western Pacific was built by Chinese labor. And this was all in the 1850s and 60s.
All right, well, let's thank Alan.
Okay.
All right. And we made it. Okay, we have one quick little announcement. I want to thank everybody. I'm going to let Gao do it.
Okay, we have collected $550 for the project. And there are people who would like to donate, and I'm going to send a note and we will try to make it to the $3,000 he needs. So that way he can go on with the project. Thank you, Robert. Okay.
Thank you. All right. Okay, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your time today, and